Hello and welcome to this special on the first of its kind Change Leadership Award 2010. Well, what a lot has changed over the last two and a half years, and this award tries to recognize the best in class where leaders have actually been one step ahead of change and have led their companies through the toughest times. Joining me to discuss all of this are Salman Khurshid, Corporate Affairs Minister, Kiran Karnik, former President of NASSCOM and former Chairman of Mahindra Satyam, Curtis Bateman, President of Spencer Johnson Foundation, and Kumar Bagrodia, CEO of LeapVault. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining me. Mr. Khurshid, I must start by congratulating you. This award is almost for you, the one on the domestic M&A, the merger and acquisition, Mahindra Satyam, and the way the government swooped in and actually, made such an emphatic statement by getting the management, taking over the management, etc.
Well,
so what is your feeling when you heard about this?
I'm glad that somebody's noticed. I think it's wonderful. I mean, anyone who appreciates what has happened in the revival process of Satyam, it's a good feeling because I think we've opened up a new paradigm. How government, we may talk about functioning differently, but we must actually show that we function differently, that the context is changed, and in the change context, our techniques must change as well, and our attitudes must change. So it's very easy to make a speech, but here I think we've actually done it, and done it without great fanfare and enormous preparation and then announcements and curtain raisers, etc. I think it happened and we did it. It's quite a little bit like economic reform that happened in 91, that we were in a crisis. There was some background, but we were in a crisis, and the government said, look, this is the time. It's now or never. I think that's what's happened here, and it's good. Now we need to ensure that this is something that comes to stay, and that it isn't just a flash in the pan, and that you've done it once and then you go back to your old way of functioning.
This was an emphatic statement, Ms. Karnik, and you were part of the team that actually got Satyam back on its feet before it actually went to Mahindra. Looking back at that journey, what were the biggest learnings? And as a jury member looking at that, I mean, what were the thoughts that went into your mind?
I think there are many aspects to it, but to me the biggest thing was the fact that how corporate India, individuals were there, and the government could work together to make something happen quickly, efficiently, and as the minister just said, without too much of a hoo-ha about it. And it's the first time that such a large corporate failure anywhere in the world has been revived. We looked around and every other case we could find had ended in a disaster. So this is a very different story. I think the story is therefore one not only of what was done, but India's resilience. Yes, there are these problems. They've happened elsewhere in the world. Elsewhere in the world, they've not quite been able to solve it. And here, as in many other of our crises, we were able to get over it. So I think one of the learnings is that if we can work together, it's there. And I think we've been able to show that. I hope there's no need to do it again. But I think whenever there's need of any kind, the possibility of cooperative joint work between the government, the corporate sector, is something that shows that a great deal can be done. And this particular merger, great move on the part of the Mahindras also, shows how corporate India is willing to take on a challenge, to look at possibilities and look ahead and not look back.
I know. It was an emphatic statement from the government, from the team that managed the change, and also from Mahindra, because it was a show of faith that they would come in and almost cowboy-like, take over the mantle and go ahead. But Curtis, looking at it from an outsider standpoint, what went through your mind? Because you've advised companies on change strategies. What do you think went right with this particular one?
Well, I think what went right, as we look over the last 2 years and we've seen government take on a very different role, I think we're starting to see a change in the way government and business are thinking. And those changes represent opportunity and hope for the future.
Kumar, what is interesting with most of the companies that have actually won these awards is that change is pretty much the essence of the awards. It's not about how successful they were, but how they managed change. So a Tata Chorus, a Mahindra Satyam, in terms of the selection procedure, what were the criteria that were adopted?
So when we set out defining each of the categories, we had a very clear mandate that it's not going to be about bigger and better. It's going to be about actions that exhibit change leadership. So whether it is in restructuring or business turnaround or M&A like Mahindra Satyam, which was also more crucial because not only was it a great M&A transaction, but it was also in a crisis. So you've got crisis management and change management in terms of post-merger integration, where the rest of the world was also in crisis. They were able to retain clients and retain talent.
Right. Mr. Khursheed, in fact, the management of talent and the image management for an industry that pretty much put India in the big league was perhaps the one big factor that compelled the government to take such an emphatic stance. Looking back, do you think it was a very important mind shift change as well for all those involved in it?
It must have been, because I think that, let's be clear that there wasn't a blueprint. There wasn't a disaster management plan. And then, with the troops in place, and then when this happened, so nobody would have known that if such a thing happened, who would be picked to send there, and whether they would accept it or whether they would have the time and the inclination to do something like this. And I think this is where the entire group that went there to salvage Mahindra. If you have confidence that someone can deliver, you've got to just let them then deliver. And I think where we've succeeded is that we made the choice of personnel who can deliver. They went and it was pro bono, obviously that makes it even better, but they delivered and got out quickly. So if you want to give them an award, you've got to give them a Mountbatten award, except that they did it without partition. They did it without partition.
Was there ever a moment where you thought, this is going to be a really tough task? I'm sure there were lots of moments. Every moment. You still can't,
as I said, if I describe it, it's what you see in the movies of this bomb about to go off and there's somebody sitting with which wire do I cut? No, I think I do want to add to the fact that we were able to draw on whomever we wanted and they just came on. It's phenomenal. I think it's something exceptional. And I must say there's something in the atmosphere of how this whole thing was done, the support that the government exhibited and then stood back, that made it so much easier for us to go to anybody at all and say, hey, we need help, will you come and help us? And there was not one person who said no. All of them did it pro bono.
One last question on the Satyam set before we move on to the awards. What is interesting is it possibly came at the worst time when the market was completely in a slump, the US economy was tottering, and then you had this huge crisis of confidence within the system because you never thought something like this could happen. You've headed NASSCOM. How serious was the crisis in terms of the possibility of it spreading across and really hitting India?
The potential for something really serious was very high. One doesn't know. It may have been a low probability event, but the fact was that the impact could have been very large. And I think that's what made many of us feel that something has to be done, and that's what, as you said earlier, the government felt that something needs to be done. And I think it's proven, I said this very early on, that if we can manage this, then in fact the reverse will happen, that those who had hesitation about coming into India or worried about what will happen will see the opposite, because this thing is very unfortunate, and all of us know that today it can happen anywhere in the world. And I think we've shown that if you can do this in India, the confidence in fact in India's ability to handle this now is greater, not less.
Let's talk about the awards themselves. What is interesting, as we've referred to earlier, is the fact that it was a horizontal award, that it didn't possibly look at one vertical, but looked at change leadership. From your standpoint, how does this award fit into what you actually do at your company?
Well, I think this represents an evolution that's taking place in the market, recognizing just how important change is. We actually have a belief that organizations may be good at their specialty in their industry or their service, but they have to become experts at change. They have to have change as a core competency. And these awards start to recognize that. They start to acknowledge that any organization can become good at change.
Change is also not just about corporates. It's also about the social sector and what organizations have done there. Why have you actually clubbed that together?
Two reasons. One, I think given that this is the world's first Change Leadership Awards and it's happening in India, I think India is more than just corporates. So we've got this whole lower middle class, the rural sector, the social class, which needs to be taken care of. And if we don't award some of the change leadership actions coming out from the NGOs in education, healthcare, what have you. So we've chosen the 15 categories, keeping in mind what are those areas which really make India? What are those key themes? Who are those key individuals who are exhibiting change leadership in their own area of work?